So the journal have asked me to do a short video about some few tips about writing a good paper. The first thing I should say is that everybody writes in a different way. So that's one of the reasons that I've never taught writing papers, because nobody ever taught me how to do it, and I feel that what I do is quite idiosyncratic, and it's quite likely that what you do will be idiosyncratic as well. And that's one of the important things. You've got to have a kind of confidence and a belief about what you're trying to do and the way you're going to do it, because an important thing in any paper and in any writing process is to find your own voice, although that's a difficult thing to do. One of the things you'll want to do is to, in a sense, at the beginning, you make your voice sound like the voices of the authors that you admire. And that's fine and quite a good thing to do, because you're trying to develop a style and you're trying to make it look right. But at the same time, it shouldn't be at the expense of your own voice and your own originality. And you will find that in some of the ways you do things, they're a bit unlike the way other people do them. For example, some people say that papers ought to have a literature review. And in many respects, that's true. A literature review is a good idea, but it may depend on the kind of paper you're writing, how much space you've got for what you're developing, and whether you want it to be that kind of paper in a way, which is a kind of summation of research that's gone before, and then saying something about what you're going to do. Second thing depends on what kind of paper it is, how theoretical it is, how clinical it is. Most of what I'm going to say will assume that you're writing a clinical paper. So the first thing that I always say with clinical papers is that the clinical material and the theoretical material should illustrate each other. That is, the purpose of the clinical example is to illustrate the theory, but also the theory should illustrate the practice. So that when you get to the clinical example, the theory that's gone before is illuminated and you think, oh yes, that's what all this is about. But also the clinical material is providing the evidence, such as it is, because in clinical writing, of course, we're not talking about proof, we're talking about something that is illuminating and helps us in our own work, which relates to another thing I want to say about theory, which I've written about in a couple of papers, particularly on the one about theory as metaphor, is that I think psychoanalytic theory is in many ways a kind of metaphorical process, and therefore one of the things that comes across in good clinical writing is there is this kind of metaphorical and almost poetic, sometimes more or less poetic way in which there's a kind of reverberation in what is being said and what is being written about that ideally should speak to more than is actually said. That's a kind of question of style. Of course, a third thing is the paper should have some kind of originality. That's one of the things the editors are looking for. That's to say, it's not going to be completely original, which is nowadays virtually impossible. And as Winnicott famously said, it's not possible to be original except on the basis of tradition. But original in the sense that you've got an interesting take on something, you're looking at it from a different angle, and it's not just a repetition of what's been said before. Now, this is also related to your own voice, because saying something in a personal way often does create a kind of originality. One of the first papers I ever wrote when I was working at the Institute of Marital Studies was we used to do a summer school every year, and I wrote a paper called Basic Theoretical Concepts, and a couple of other people had done that before, so I was quite anxious about it, but I wrote my paper, and of course it was different from the ones that had gone before, although the concepts we were talking about and the areas we were covering were the same. We were different people with different interests, different backgrounds, different theoretical orientations to some extent, and so what we wrote was although not original in the sense that these weren't papers written to be published, but they had a kind of individuality about them which made them interesting. So really, that's all I want to say about this. And the last thing is, of course, to encourage people to write. I tend to believe, again on the basis of my own experience, is that if you really want to write, you will write. I know that's only partly true because some people do lack confidence. They have feelings of shame about their own work. They feel that they can't compete with what's already been done. But I do think it has to come from inside you. And if it is coming from inside you, if you do have a feeling that you want to write, then do write. And one of the things you will also find that if you submit to a journal like the JAP, although the peer review process is quite complicated and lengthy, it is supportive because we always want to encourage new writers. We've all been new writers ourselves, and we know how, in a sense, narcissistically sensitive we all are about our own work. So it is a process of encouragement. There will be criticism. There usually are suggestions for revision, but especially with clinical papers, the journal is always very keen to see new clinical papers because there's not enough of them these days. So good luck.